being more mindful about how things are made. Just being being able to look at a thing and say, I can appreciate how that's been made, and I have a sense of the direct and indirect costs associated with it, and then you make choices based on your own ideology, your own preferences. So I'm Tim Minshall, I'm an academic at the University of Cambridge. I have a wonderful but rather long job title, so I'm the Dr. John C. Taylor Professor of Innovation. John C. Taylor is this amazing inventor, entrepreneur and engineer who made a technology that every single one of us pretty much will use once a day. He's the inventor of the electric kettle switch, which is a lovely application of bimetallic technology to control our kettles. About 1 billion are being used right now. So that's half my job. The other half is I'm head of something called the Institute for Manufacturing, which is part of Cambridge University Engineering Department. I think so, absolutely, because the manufacturing system, and that analogy with the sewage system is perhaps a little unkind, but it does have that feeling that it's a thing we need, we know it's there, and we only really see it when it goes wrong, and then we want it fixed really quickly. And so for manufacturing, the fact we've ended up with a system that is fantastic. I mean, you know, we always do this exercise. Look around you now, every single thing you can see, apart from the three of us, has been manufactured, or maybe that plant has been manufactured. And that's extraordinary. So there's you know, billions of products being made for billions of people, and we have an entire fantastically complex system for doing that. And we don't really notice it, but there's two reasons we should. Number one, it's not very resilient. And we can see great examples of that from 2021, when that, if you remember the ship, the Ever Given, got wedged across the Suez Canal. So 30% of all the world's containers go on ships that go through the Suez Canal. 400 million a year, 30% go through the Suez Canal. It's about 10% of all global trade, one narrow waterway. One person on one ship makes one mistake, you know, 10% of global trade stops. That's not a good system that we've built there. It's fantastically clever how it does it. We get so many products that are cheap or at a good price, at the right quality, delivered quickly, but it's incredibly fragile how that works. So that's one problem. The second problem is it's actually quite harmful to the planet. All of those thousands of ships whizzing around all the time, all those planes flying around, all the consumption and pollution coming from the diesel, from the kerosene. We move stuff around a lot, and that causes it is having a cumulative effect on the planet in terms of emissions and pollution. There's a second bit to this sustainability problem with manufacturing, which is us. We waste an awful lot of what is produced. And you just look at different industries. So to me, food is a manufacturing industry. We produce enough food, so we've got a population of 8 billion, at least enough for 10, if not 12 billion people. But we waste around 40% of all the food we produce. So the system is just, we're wasting a lot. Clothing is another fantastic example. Absolutely amazing what's been achieved in allowing us to have low cost clothing provided, you know, very speedily. That's fantastic. Employs millions of people. That's good, provides good jobs. But we waste so much of it. Tons and tons of the things that we buy get probably used once, if at all, and then just disposed of, and not recycled. So for those two reasons, this issue of we should be aware of how fragile this system is and how harmful it is to the planet, that's why I think more of us should take an appreciation of manufacturing so that we can make a positive effect on making it better. It's a wonderful dilemma, a problem with you know, two different outcomes and intention. One is, yes, it's great. We have the choice to have the products that we want, but the system we have does not tailor the product just for you or just for me. So we end up producing things that are very often not needed. We overproduce to get us what we want. So one of the angles on this I think should be about more, and I'm a natural techno-optimist, that technology will help us with this, with the move towards more technologies that allow us to move towards mass personalization. So one little quick example of this is if you draw a graph, the standard manufacturing engineer's graph of volume versus variety, you can have high volumes, can't have much variety, it's too expensive. You can have a lot of variety, but you can't produce very much of it. So what we want to do is to push into the top right corner where you can have high volume and high variety. And if you can do that, then we produce much more efficiently and effectively by just giving us what we want. So yes, it is a problem. It's rather wonderful, but it's a problem that we can produce so much, so quickly, so cheaply, so reliably. And there are ways of getting us away from that. But as with all complex systems, very, very hard to change. It's a great point. And back a few years ago, about 10 years ago, there was a massive surge in interest around 3D printing. And you may be familiar with the Gartner hype cycle. We have this idea of technology arrives and people go, oh, that's interesting. And then they get really excited about it. And you end up with what's called the peak of inflated expectations. And then people go, wait a minute, this doesn't work. And it goes right down into the wonderfully named trough of disillusionment. And then over time, you level out and say, it's not going to change everything. It is still quite useful. We have to work out the right use cases. 3D printing fell very much into that category. And when it was right at the top, for any fans of Star Trek will remember Jean-Luc Picard, walking up to his replicator and saying, tea, Earl Grey hot, poof, and the product appears. People started to believe we could do that. And we're nowhere near that. We never will be, I don't think. But there are very, very strong use cases for 3D printing in specific areas. So small things that need to be customized, where you can charge quite a high margin. So things basically that attach to the human body. Prosthetics, orthotics, very much. Hearing aids, things like that. Absolutely a very, very clear use case for that. But you need to, if you want to do it in high volume, people say, oh, well, it's too expensive. Yes, you can't do high volumes low cost. You can do high volumes at medium cost by having lots and lots of printers. But every single one is producing a different product. You're customizing at the level of software. There's a compromise. There's a middle ground here. And I think it is fair to say that in some nations we have moved perhaps a little bit too far to rely on the ultimate reliability of distributed production networks. And I think recent events, COVID in particular, revealed the risks of doing that. So I think it's quite natural that there's and it's a healthy interest in ensuring that individual nations have, use my words carefully here, sufficient manufacturing capabilities. That does not mean, in my view, the bring it all back argument. That just leads to a very unusual place, a place that doesn't really work economically. But I do think a rebalancing of where we manufacture is quite healthy for simple reasons of resilience, to support security, and to be more sustainable. Because if you've made more things locally, you're moving things less far. But there will always be people elsewhere who can make things far better than you can, at a better cost, better quality. Why would you not do that? But it shouldn't be 100% instead of ensuring that you don't do anything at all by saying, rather wonderfully as some have done, we are post-industrial. In very, very, very few economies is that genuinely possible. An example that's often given, they go, yes, but you look at economies like Switzerland or Singapore, they don't need manufacturing. And you go, well, that's just wrong, because they are amongst the highest per capita manufacturing value add countries in the world. But they do it in balance. They have a balance between things they make themselves and they import from elsewhere. They also have a balance across production part of the economy and the service part of the economy. I think it's a lovely way of putting it, more mindful and more respectful. Yes, but we try to look at this, what's the perfect pair of jeans, right? Can I actually work out what is the pair of jeans that is best for the planet within my budget? It's almost impossible, because everything is a trade-off. There's not good and not good. There's lots and lots of things you're constantly trading off, from the way in which the cotton was grown, whether you're using natural or chemical dyes, where it was done, the conditions in the factory, how far the denim will have travelled, what are the conditions in the cut and sew part of that bit of manufacturing industry. All of these things, we don't have time to process all that. But I love your phrase, though, about being a bit more mindful. Just means we go, if it's that low cost, I wonder how that was done. Or let's look at the label. Where was it made? So clearly that's travelled quite a long way. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy it, but just to be more mindful of it and saying, I wonder if there's an alternative that I could find. It may be very likely that there's not possible. But being a bit more mindful just forces us to say, I'm aware of the consequences, of the real cost of the, what economists call externalities of my production, of my choice of production. I couldn't say whether it is a deliberate strategy. It is something that we observe, though, that are they being deliberately designed to have shorter lives? Not so sure, but are they designed in a way that makes them very hard to repair? Yes. but whether it is an intentional desire to not make it repairable versus this is just a better customer experience. If we use these production processes, we can make the product thinner, lighter, whatever it may be. So it's not necessarily deliberately making it hard to repair by taking all the screws out and putting glue in, as one example of you see in phones. It's actually arguably trying to make the product better. So with the pushback that a lot of IT electronics firms have seen from customers, we're now seeing them coming back in again, saying no, actually people will put up with a slightly perhaps thicker product or slightly more robust product if they know it's repairable. So I think it's a shift in mindset. It's not a not repairable and we're going to keep doing that, and we want repairable, so I want my phone to be completely dismantleable in my kitchen. That's not going to happen. It's somewhere in the middle, as always. Absolutely. So it's not that I am not picking on any company at all, but the right to repair is very important. But it's also, there must be the capability to repair. It's no good saying, okay, yep, we can make this all based on screws and you can just take your phone apart, it's absolutely fine. That doesn't mean you can repair it, because do you have all the tools and components to allow you to actually repair it? Will it devalue the functionality of that product? So it's got to be done smart. Another argument is safety issues. We think about a phone, there's not too much harm you can do, although I do go into this in the book a little bit. One of my colleagues rather spectacularly trying to take the battery out of his phone, and he managed to bend the battery. That did not end well. That resulted in a rather expensive outcome. He had to have a new battery put in his phone anyway. He also managed to set fire to his carpet and had to have the house recarpeted. So, be careful. And when you look at things like agricultural equipment, where there's a big debate about repairability and software-powered multi-$100,000 machines, but one of the arguments from the manufacturers is, yes, but if you start messing around with these, they can do a lot of harm to the operator. And that argument can be overused, but I think it's nonetheless a fair argument. So I think on the repairability issue, as I said, it is something we do talk about in the book. It's a whole series of R's. It's not just we can't sometimes jump to, it must be recyclable, it must be repairable, but go back a bit further and going, well, what if it's still perfectly good, your product? Not rather than just going, well, I shall leap to having it recycled. All of those other R starting words of the reusing, the repurposing, and then the repairing, which is hugely important, and then the recycling and taking the materials out and making them useful elsewhere. But it's a whole continuum of activities, one step of which is repairability. I think one of them, so we're very interested in the world of medicine and healthcare, and seeing the development of CAR-T cancer treatment, so chimeric antigen receptor T cells, if I'm getting that right, where it is absolutely this idea of mass personalization, mass customization at the highest level. So it's taking an individual patient's cells, a patient was suffering from certain types of cancer, extract the cells, do some manufacturing processes on those cells to reprogram them so they target the cancer cells, inject them back into the body. That is ultimate personalized manufacturing. There is one customer and there is one production process for that one customer. That's to me an illustration of where manufacturing at the highest level could be, and in fact in that case is heading. I was worried you were going to ask me a question like that. Almost impossible to say. CAR-T is happening now, but it is incredibly expensive. And where is the capability to do it? It's very, very specialized. So we're ending up moving things around a lot and creating certain challenges where you have to have there's the idea of the supply network, and then there's the idea of the cold chain for perishable goods. Now you have to have a certified cold chain, guaranteed that the temperature of that particular sample has not at any point deviated from its target range. Very expensive to do that. So we're then seeing new hospitals being built where they have these, they would call them labs, to me they're more like a factory, where they can process the cells. We also see another intermediate step, which is rather than saying every single individual patient has this treatment, something like CAR-T, but other personalized treatments where it's stratified. You say it's not just for one patient, it's for a group of patients. It might be quite a small group, but saying the people with these very specific characteristics and comorbidities, can we develop something just for them? At the moment, economically, that's very, very difficult to do. and all the manufacturing is set up for either one or two people on who can afford very, very specialised treatment, or a bog standard, treatment like, I don't know, paracetamol. You make 160,000 tons of it a year, and it's just shipped out, and everybody reacts to it in a different way, and it's differently effective for different patients. So I think, slightly avoiding your question, I can't put a timeline on it, but some of it is happening right now. Some of it will be many decades away, if at all, but there's something in the middle, I reckon, in the next 10 to 20 years. So the way you ended that question, yes, can we do better? Absolutely. Right, and I think there's two sides to this. There's making things better, as in being clearer and being cleaner in how we produce the things we produce now. And thinking about, can we reduce the distance? Not necessarily always, and because sometimes we have to do things far away because that's where the skills are. But can we then move things cleaner? So there's a making it better, moving it better, so there's that bit. There's then a separate issue, which is making better things. Things that perhaps last longer, things that are more targeted at the most positive impact on the planet. So, for example, the incredible complexity of changing global aerospace, bringing in sustainable aviation fuels and bringing in hybrid power systems, things we can do to people are going to want to travel. Travel is good. We want people moving around for all sorts of reasons. But can we do it? Can we make products that are inherently less harmful to the planet? So it's making things better and making better things. But maybe the pinnacle of this comes from the world of agriculture, where they're now talking about regenerative agriculture. And colleagues are looking and saying, well, could we have regenerative industry? Could we have factories that actually what they bring in, there's no waste coming out, everything has a value attached to it that can be used by someone else, and it's actually overproducing things that are positive. Now, it requires a slight change of mindset, but the ultimate dream would be the factory that you want to have at the end of your road, because its emissions are clean water, free heat, purified air, all these good things. So the factory becomes something that is inherently regenerative. Now, we are quite a long way from that at the moment, but we see examples of it appearing, those specialist use cases, to show that elements of it are definitely possible. Your excellent point, which is being more mindful about how things are made. Just being able to look at a thing and say, I can appreciate how that's been made, and I have a sense of the direct and indirect costs associated with it, and then you make choices based on your own ideology, your own preferences. But I think it is that. And so in order to get to that point, I think it's just having an understanding of these basic processes. So the book is trying to just explain manufacturing in the simplest term possible, in the most relevant terms, to then say, we can do better, and it starts with us. So this book is available from all good booksellers now in the UK and in the US. It has a slightly different title in the US. In the US, it's published by Echo HarperCollins and is called How Things Are Made. In the UK and around Europe, it's published as Your Life is Manufactured by Faber.